All right. So welcome back, everybody, to another Course in Miracles teaching session. Um, we're making our way through the first chapter of the text, which is going into the nature of miracles, some of the principles, the metaphysics behind what is a miracle, what is the context, um, what are the rules and the principles that it works on. And we're going to be delving into some aspects of that, which is light versus darkness. I think that's the big lesson that we're going to go through today, which is the escape from darkness, right? How do we open our eyes to see reality as it really is? And the course, I love it because it plays on words and gives them meanings that we didn't normally think of, right? It uses words and language to open us to a completely new perspective that allows us to escape and to see, to change our perspective, that allows us to eventually see the light and root ourselves in the light and love, which is our true nature. Um, so darkness is a major theme throughout the whole course, and it's not what you normally think of. And so the more open you can become to this, um, to this concept and allow it to sink in, the more you'll get out of this. Because darkness is the opposite of what the world thinks of as darkness. So darkness is whatever you see with your light. Sorry, with your eyes. When you turn on a light, your mind, your eyes will all of a sudden see, the room around you, the door, the windows, the animals, the people, and all of those things that are around you. And um, and we think within this world, if we've developed X-rays, we've developed lights, we've developed sensors and science and tests and all of those things. And we think if we can just perfect this vision or this knowledge of the world, right? The world that we see with our eyes, if we can just get that right, we'll solve the world's problems, right? We'll solve world hunger or we'll eradicate disease and create a world that has less suffering and more abundance and more um, wealth and prosperity. But it doesn't work. You can just look at it very easily, right? You look at technology, you look at light, you look at knowledge or whatever. Different political systems, they seem to bring some benefits, right? Oh, we don't no longer have a king who tells us what to do. But it just brings in a whole other host of problems that are just as bad usually, right? Because tyranny by the majority versus a tyranny by the king, they lead to pretty much the same things, wars, corruption, and whatnot. And the same thing with technologies, right? You look at the internet, right? It's brought a lot of good, but it's also brought a lot of harms, So that's just the way the world works. So, what the course is offering us here is that um, darkness, what we see with our eyes, the more we can give that up, the more that we can um, place doubt in this world, uh, the more we will be open to developing spiritual sight. And spiritual sight or knowledge is not seen with the eyes. It is something that is felt on a deep level. For me, I feel it in my heart. It's a deep knowing. It's a knowing of oneness. It's a knowing of unconditional love, of unity. Those things, like when they come, you just know it, and there's nobody can convince you otherwise, right? It's kind of like it's not because you deduce that because there's the Big Bang must have been caused by somebody, therefore there must be a God. It's like, no, 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 it's not that at all. This is just a deep knowing that comes from our very nature. And actually, um, the the more we doubt what we see with our eyes, which is lesson number one, nothing I see means anything. That opens us. We withdraw meaning from the world around us, and that opens us to experiencing meaning from within. And that's when we can begin to experience the light, which is unconditional love and seeing others, seeing one another, seeing the world, seeing God through this light, this spiritual light that is felt within the heart. Um, and that's what we're going to be exploring today. Another thing to keep in mind as we delve into this is something we've reviewed many times, and that is, why are we living in a world of darkness? Why are we in this physical world to begin with? And that's super important to understand if we're going to be able to escape it, because we have a major investment in this world, right? So when you open up, when you try to do these exercises and try to withdraw meaning from the world and open yourself to spiritual sight, you'll encounter a lot of resistance. Your mind does not want to do that. You know what I mean? Your mind will start racing. This is stupid, or fear will arise, and fear keeps us rooted within the world. So just to review briefly how we got here, right? So first, our natural state is unconditional love, unity, oneness in bliss, joy, uh, and and unconditional peace with unity with God and one another in heaven. That's our true nature, right? And that's the way that God created us, and that we're always meant to be, and never really can change from that. But into the mind of God's Son, right, crept this tiny mad idea that what would it be like, right? Um, if I was separate, if I was my own consciousness, right, separate from God, separate from love, separate from peace, separate from unity. And because our mind was created just like God, it has the same power. And so when we create this hypothetical thought, we don't change reality, but in our experience we do. So when we think, oh, what would it be like to be separate from God? All of a sudden we experience that, right? And because we forgot to laugh, right? And that's that line into the mind of God's Son that crept a tiny man idea at which God's Son forgot to laugh, right? That's a paraphrase anyway of the line, because it's so ridiculous, it doesn't make sense, right? Because nothing can be separate from God. But because we forgot to laugh, because we took it seriously and we invested ourselves in it, it became our reality. And so from this oneness, unity, and joy, we entered this experience of lack, of destroying heaven, of the loss of everything that was good within the world, and this resting of our consciousness into this fragile and vulnerable uh, ego, or consciousness that, um, because it's so unstable, right? Because it's kind of like it's based on a lie. Anything can threaten it. So um, it's in this state of pain. It's in this state of lack. It's in this state of guilt, of believing that it's done something horrible, right? It didn't, because it couldn't really happen, but it feels like it did. And you can experience this within your mind as you sit with your pain. As you sit with your pain, as you do your forgiveness exercises, you'll notice it. It's going to deepen. It's going to get worse. You're going to get closer and closer to that pain that created the universe. So how do we create the universe? So in this experience of gut-wrenching guilt and lack and feeling of wretchedness, it's so unbearable that we needed to push it outward. And so the first push outward was to uh, God, because once we believe that we're separate from God, you can't have an accurate perception of God. So then we create what we did was we pushed it outward to this conception of God, which is Sky Daddy. That's what I call him, right? It's the man in the sky who created this world, really, which was us, right? But the one who counts your sins, and you can and regardless of the mythology around it, go to the inner experience when you sit with your pain, when you sit with yourself as an ego, explore that a little bit and just notice, because you will notice that you constantly feel like there's somebody out to get you. Like somebody, it's the government, it's your neighbor, it's the police, it's a criminal or whatever. You just feel like you're vulnerable and somebody is going to justly come after you and get their just desserts from you, right? And that's just a feeling that's in there, and you'll experience that the more you sit with your pain. So this is that one layer. That's the second layer, which is the projection outward, right? So then what's the benefit of that? Then we can feel like, oh, I'm just poor little me, right? Like this is the evil ego god, right? Who's coming to get his vengeance on me because I did something horrible. But he's the one, like I'm just being me. I'm just being Patrick or whatever. I mean, this is before we split off into different egos. But anyway, uh, that was the second move. From there, all of a sudden, we're feeling a little bit more innocent because then we can at least feel like that guy's the evil one, right? There's this government coming after me. There's this ego god. Or whatever that's coming after us. And that creates the idea that we want to escape because that guilt is so bad that it creates a very vengeful ego god. Um, at the very least, you experience him as neglectful, inconsistent, not really there, not a loving God at all, right? It's the God of the Old Testament, who sometimes might be on your side, but as a snap of the fingers, he will be getting his just desserts, right? So, um, that experience still it feels a little better because we push the guilt a little bit to the outside, but we still it's still like terrifying, right? So you're full of fear. You feel like there's something bad going to happen to you, and you're going to deserve it. And so we need to. It's still too unbearable to endure, right? It's too painful. So what do we do? And what that is fragmentation. So instead, what we do is we create a world that we can go and hide in. We want to split up like a school of fish, right? That a shark is coming after. And at the very least, we can push the guilt, we can spread it out, right? And so we create a world where we can experience at least that we're not the only one here, right? So like if you're bad and God's kind of coming after the world because we're awful, at least you're just kind of one of them and you can probably escape it because the guilt is kind of spread out around us. But even then, right? Even then, um, uh, it's still you can still feel like you're one of the guilty ones, right? Because then you'd experience yourself as equally evil as the rest of them. And we don't like that. Egos don't like that. We like to feel like we're the innocent victim, right? Or the hero or whatever, right? So the next layer is projection. And we talked about this last week, right? So that projection, what we do is we take our guilt, the same guilt that we think is coming from things in the world, like so, oh, like we uh, you know, didn't visit your grandma before she died or whatever, right? So we take the guilt we think that are coming from things in the world, but they're not. They're coming from this original destruction of heaven, or perceived destruction of heaven. Um, and what we want to do is we want to push it onto others. So what happens is we then have to get rid of this painful guilt that we feel and the fear that God's going to punish, this ego God's going to punish us. We like to see others as evil, right? So what we do is we create time and space. Time is a creation basically to push away guilt. Um, and space is the same thing. So what we see is that, okay, I did some awful things, but they were in the past. Or some awful things happened, but they happened in history, right? So it was like it was the Holocaust or it was or whatever. And they're not really, I didn't really do that. I'm just poor little me, right? I'm not part of this whole collective consciousness. Um, and space is the same thing. What we do is we create other people, other places, right? So if there's awful things happening, there's genocide happening. I don't. I'm just here in Canada. You know what I mean? I'm not in the Middle East, right? So that doesn't really have anything to do with me. So we create space to push things away. Um, so that's part of the fragmentation. But the projection is that the evil is in those other things on the other side, right? So that person, so what happens is there is a part of us, this same part, that loves to be mistreated. It loves to be victimized because that reinforces the idea that the evil isn't on the outside, right? So like there's a part of me that loved getting my medical license taken away because I could see those evil bastards, right, who were violating the Constitution and endangering patients and whatnot. And I was just the poor little me doing the right thing. Um, Not realizing that I am one with that other person, right? And so that guilt is separate. So the ego's plan for salvation is to push it to the outside. Now, there is another layer, because we talked about most of this last week, but there's another layer that people are even more resistant um, to letting go of. And what that is the special love relationships. The special hate, we're a little more apt to understand, right? So that's the perception of evil on anything on the outside, which is people mistreating you, wars, uh, things you see in the news, the gossip or whatever that like my ego loves to see that stuff, right? Until you learn to forgive it. But the ego loves to see awfulness on the outside. There's kind of a little, because you're like, at least I'm not as bad as that person, right? You know what I mean? Look how awful they are, right? And I don't do that. Um, so, but on top of that is what's called the special love relationship. And what that is basically, we don't like to just, I mean, if we just felt like we were the only good people in the world and everybody else was evil, that would be kind of lonely, right? And so what we like to do is create special love relationships. So that can happen in a romantic relationship, but it can happen with your boss, it can happen with your country, it can happen with anything. And that's where you perceive good within the world, any good, right? It can be with nature, it can be with homesteading, right? It can be uh, and the way to detect it is like you're seeing something as good in a world that is awful, right? So, oh, homesteading allows you to escape the cities, right? You're not eating all the awful chemicals from the corporations or whatever in the food chain. Um, it can happen with a profession or a line of treatments, or you think you get into natural therapies, right? So if you notice you like natural therapies, it's because you can't stand or you see as evil conventional treatments, right? So what that is it's a projection and it's a covering up of the hatred because I don't hate everything, right? I'm not a hateful person, right? I love the things that are good. I love freedom. I love capitalism. I love farming or whatever things you think you love. I love my wife because she's so good to me, right? So within that special love relationship, what you'll notice is there's a pushing of guilt to the outside. So you'll notice with that with every like, there is always a dislike. With every um, uh, love, there's an exclusivity around it. And so with that, um, we create this idea that there's good within the world. And so it allows us to stay attached to it, not realizing that we're actually reinforcing the hatred of all of the other things and not realizing that this special love is just a cover on special hate. Because as soon as that person no longer meets that need that you're getting from them, that good, or they no longer help to keep that hatred from the outside, right? So somebody changes their political opinions, your partner puts on a bunch of weight, so they're no longer hot or attractive or whatever. Um, then your hatred for the ugly people, right, will then come through. Um, and so, and at the very least, anything good within this world dies. And so, uh, what happens is special love always turn to pain, fear, and disappointment. But the mind is very resistant to seeing that. The special love relationships, the perception of good within the world, um, um, is very hard to let go of because it turns when you're ready to let go of it, this world will show its face. It will remove its mask, and you'll see this place as a nightmare, a hellscape that we're living in, right? Um, and and this shows up not just as Patrick as an ego, but it will show up um, as you're beginning to let it go. What you'll notice is the gaps in the battle. If you see this world as a battle, right? Like so the hardships, the awfulness, the death, the fear, the pain, the suffering. What you'll notice throughout most of our human incarnations, our perceived incarnations, what will happen is we'll have these experiences of pain, and then we have gaps in between where things seem to be going smoothly. And in those periods, you feel like, oh, it's not that bad being an ego, right? You know what I mean? Like I got my uh, house with two kids, I got a good job going on, everything's kind of going kind of good. Um, and so when you're still stuck very much in the ego, those seem to last quite a while. So then it feels like the disruptions are um, the exception and not the rule. But as you progress spiritually, as you begin to awaken, you start to see through that. So what happens is that um, you start to see through the special love. You start to see through the things that you like, and they start to fail quicker and quicker, right? So you get a new house and oh, it's nice, and then something breaks in it or it burns down, or your landlord kicks you off and you have to move your house or whatever seems to happen. Or just something blows up in a relationship, right? And so it happens sooner and sooner. And what that is reality revealing itself that there is no good in the world, right? And anything here will never ever satisfy that void that's on the inside. And so this is the world of darkness that we're talking about, because we're going to get into the text now. But this whole world of darkness there is no light here. And so what special love is, what any perception or experience of something good within the world doesn't mean you can't have love, light, or whatever, but if it if you're happy because of something within the world, because you got a good job, or because you have a great relationship, um, then you're in for a rude awakening at some point, sooner or later. It might not even be in this lifetime. Sometimes you have these lifetimes where you just go smoothly through it, but you won't spiritually progress because that will never really fill the void. When you're ready for that void to be filled with the light, which is what we are actually craving, um, then what you're going to experience is your life is going to turn to hell. And even if it doesn't turn into a giant disaster where you get thrown in prison and tortured or whatever, what will happen is you'll feel like it. You'll start to see through things, and you'll start to experience the pain deeper and deeper, that comes from the original break from heaven, right? So you start to feel this deepening, worsening guilt over little things, right? Might not be like something giant happened, but somebody disappoints you, and then a murderous rage comes up within you, right? And so, um, as you're awakening, you start to see this, or what you realize is as soon as you identify as Patrick, as soon as you identify as your ego, before even anything blows up, you all of a sudden you're in this horrendous pain. That's kind of what I'm starting to experience, honestly, is just constant pain. And there's a deep truth in that, which is that being an ego is painful. Being an ego is hell. And actually, anything except unconditional love and recognition of ourselves as spirit is hell. And so, what happens is instead of these discrete events seeming to make your life miserable that you have to forgive, what you start to realize is, holy crap, I need to forgive the whole thing because just being Patrick at all, or believing that you're separate, is horrendously painful, and that will eventually come through, and that's what's called the final judgment, which we'll get into a little later, I think, in a different chapter. All right. So I've gone on and on about that. I think it's a repetition of last time, but I think it's really important, right? Because this is not a history lesson. These are layers of the mind. And as you continue your practice, as you forgive, as you open your mind to the pain of being an ego, these layers will reveal themselves. And when we finally forgive, not just being Patrick and separating and projecting, but eventually just being separate at all, and we realize I'm done with it, when we can make the decision to let it go. All right, I have dogs here today. So. Over there. All right. All right, let's move on to the text here. All right, so oh, I think it froze here. Mhm. Oh, there. Oh, I think I froze, but I'm going to try this again to share my screen. All right, and let me see here. Thought I could, okay, thought I could enlarge my face, but I can't. Okay, so this is the escape from darkness. So the escape from darkness involves two stages. First is the recognition that darkness cannot hide. This step usually entails fear. So this is the step that I just talked about, right? So this is where some people call this the dark night of the soul. We often have many of them. It's really the dark night of the ego. Um, but essentially, what we start to realize, and we realize this through experience, that these escapes that we thought we could find within the world, right? The great relationship or the having a good job or just whatever, your alcohol, whatever feels like it gives you a little bit of solace within the world, they stop working, right? Or if they work for less and less time, right? And so what starts to happen is your life falls apart as it is. And if it doesn't fall apart externally, it does internally. Um, so it doesn't mean you need to necessarily break up with your partner or whatever, but what starts to happen is you realize that you hate them, you know, or they just do certain things that bring up this deeper and deeper hatred, right? Um, and you realize eventually that you hate everybody because that's part of being an ego. Um, and actually the beautiful part of that is that that opens you up to the experience of unconditional love, not a love that comes from a relationship or a job or a friendship, that comes from getting things from somebody, but they're always going to disappoint you. And eventually that brings the opportunity for forgiveness. And that will bring you a joy that goes far beyond having a good relationship, having a good job, having a good life could ever bring you. And what you realize is that those disappointments, seeming disappointments, those seeming upsets are the opportunities in your ticket to waking up to unconditional love that is far beyond any other level of love that you could possibly have. Okay, so the first stage is that recognition that you can't find happiness within the world. You cannot find any happiness as Patrick. It can seem like it, but that starts to fade away. And you realize, especially as you have more and more of these light experiences or the revelation experiences, that these oneness, unconditional love experiences that fill that void that you've had for your entire existence, um, you realize nothing can measure up to that. And so what will start to happen is quicker and quicker you realize all of the happiness you thought you could find in the world is not possible. But you can find happiness, just not in the world. Okay. So the second, the recognition that there is nothing you want to hide, even if you could. This step brings escape from fear. When you have become willing to hide nothing, you will not only be willing to enter into communion, but will also understand peace and joy. So this is where, like I talked about with forgiveness, this is where forgiveness, the miracle comes in, because as those upsets, as the misery, as the deep, horrendous pain of being an ego, of separating from oneness, uh, starts to emerge within your life, first through discrete different events, right? Like the loss of your medical license or bankruptcy or whatever, a conflict with your landlord or whatever it might seem to be. Um, but eventually, just a growing pain anytime you identify with your ego. Um, when you start to practice forgiveness, when you start to see through that, see past what you see with your eyes to the truth behind it, right? That everyone is innocent. We are all one. Nobody can be harmed. No sin or awfulness ever occurred between any of us, and that we're all innocent, always loving, and always peaceful. When you see that and you realize these upsets are opportunities to recognize that, then you realize, oh, I don't even want to have a good life, right? Within the world. You want peace and joy, but that doesn't come from having a good life as a human being. Um, so so that's when you escape the fear. That's when you embrace and you look forward to forgiveness opportunities. You look forward to being unjustly accused and thrown in jail and given some medical experimentations, because actually the more that happens, the more you forgive and the more you see the light and the more that light is imperturbable and starts to shine through even the darkest of things that can seem to happen within the world. The joy and the peace that comes from that, you just you want more forgiveness. Bring on the forgiveness because that brings more joy, right? So lock me up, do all those things. And that's what happened with Jesus, right? Eventually, he's like, bring it on. Nothing, not, I'm not a body, right? And actually, the more I forgive, the more joy and peace and imperturbability that you experience. Okay. So two, holiness can never really be hidden in darkness, but you can deceive yourself about it. So holiness, our true nature, as oneness, innocence, um, it can't really be hidden within the world. And so, um, but we can deceive ourselves. So this deception, they're saying here, this deception makes you fearful because you realize in your heart that it is a deception, and you exert enormous efforts to establish its reality. So, um, one thing that I've noticed uh, is in myself and in others that have canceled them or whatever, is that the more upset you are about something, if you notice that, the more seemingly certain you are about it, right? When somebody did something awful to you, you're like, I saw that with my own eyes and I know they did it on purpose, right? When somebody does something awful, you know it and you're certain and the more certain you are about it, the more painful it is, right? The more angry you are, the more fearful you are, like the more certain you are, you know the government's gonna audit you and take away your house, right? Um, the more fearful you are. So that certainty comes from a different place. I feel it more in my head, but it always comes with a sense of fear. And that, but what you can feel that within your heart. So the more upset you are, the more certain you are of what you saw with your physical eyes, right? Um, but what you'll notice within your heart is that your heart is always closed in that state. So when you pay attention to your heart, what you'll notice is that um, when you enter the don't know mind, when you start to withdraw meaning from what you see with your eyes and you start to look to the spiritual reality, um, it always comes with a sense of peace and a not knowing. It's actually a not caring, not knowing of what happens within the world. So those are kind of two different correlates that kind of go together. Um, so the miracle sets reality where it does where it belongs. Reality belongs only to spirit, and the miracle acknowledges only truth. It thus dispels illusions about yourself and puts you in communion with yourself and God. The miracle joins the atonement by placing the mind in the service of the Holy Spirit. This establishes the proper function of the mind and corrects its errors, which are merely lacks of love. So there's a lot here. Um, so yeah, so the miracle, what it is, it's a withdrawal of what you see with your eyes, because none of that means anything, because all of that comes from a misperception deeper within the mind. And so the more you look into what you saw with your eyes, or you try to sort out your relationships within the world, right, by writing an apology letter or by doing something within the world to fix a relationship, a problem, or whatever, it never works, right? It actually reinforces the fear. And so it might fix that problem, but what you'll feel is you still feel vulnerable to that problem and it will show up again and produce that exact same fear. So the miracle does the opposite. What it does is it withdraws meaning. I don't know anything. I don't know that I harmed that person or that that person actually harmed me. Maybe I don't know anything about the world. And then when you start to look to the spiritual reality behind them, to see the innocence in the other, to start to look, um, and we open our mind to the Holy Spirit, help me to see this in a different way because I'm never upset for the reason I think, right? One of the first things that the Spirit does is starts to allow us to see things in a different way that opens the mind to heal it. And one of that way is the call for love, right? So when we see wrongdoing, when we see problems, when we see sickness, when we see war, um, or we see somebody seemingly mistreat us, we're not really that open to being like, okay, well, I know nothing, right? So, crucify me. Um, our minds aren't like that doesn't really work. Like nothing is real, you know what I mean? Well, I feel the pain, so you're not really open or willing to do that. So one of the first things the Holy Spirit often offers is a reinterpretation that will open our mind to seeing it in a new way. And one of those is seeing a lack of love. Because the Holy Spirit, all there is love. All when we're perceiving anything wrong, anything, a mistreatment, a misdeed, a sickness, or whatever, if you can open your mind that maybe this is just a lack of love, if you can feel that, you allow it to sink in within your mind. And so when you're seeing somebody mistreating you, mistreating somebody else, when you explore seeing that as a lack of love, oh, wait a second, this is a lack of love within my mind. The fact that I'm seeing wrongdoing, the fact that I'm seeing suffering is something going on in my mind. My mind is sick, right? It's not them, it's my mind. And so what I'm seeing is actually a lack of love because I'm seeing fear there. When you see a war, when you see genocide or whatever, if you're seeing it with the ego's eyes, you're feeling fear. But if you can see it instead, oh, wait a second, this is something within my mind in which I have neglected to offer love. And so when you see that as a lack of love, all of a sudden, within my experience, at least, this is after years of practice, right? But I start to feel immediately when I recognize a lack of love, I immediately start to feel love flowing out from me, right? Oh, I recognize this. This is something I need to send love to. And I just sit there and I send love to that situation, to that person, or whatever, and take responsibility for it that way. That is how the Holy Spirit eventually um, uh, corrects the mind, uh, just to see things as innocent. When there's just a lack of love that I forgot to send, you just start sending the love. And when that happens, it slowly dissolves away the guilt, the fear, the consequences that seem to come from that. That's not something that Patrick's capable of doing. Um, but when you can really see it and experience it as just a lack of love, you'll start to feel the love flow, and then you can actually be grateful. That situation will bring you joy because when you start to feel the love flowing out of you, you remember that that's what awakens you, and you remember that you are whole. Okay. Um, your mind can be possessed by illusions, but spirit is eternally free. If a mind perceives without love, it perceives an empty shell and is unaware of the spirit within. But the atonement restores spirit to its proper place. The mind that serves spirit is invulnerable. Um, what I'm really pulling out here, if a mind perceives without love, it perceives an empty shell and is unaware of the spirit within. So here, I think what's really important is an early lesson within the course, which is there are no neutral thoughts. So when um, we see people with our eyes within the world, politicians, innocent civilians, whatever they might be. Pay attention to your heart when you see any of them, because if you don't see the light within them, if you don't experience love with anybody around you, or anybody who crosses your mind, or you see in the news, or whatever, you're perceiving them as an empty shell. And that's actually fear, because there are no neutral thoughts. It's either ego or spirit. Anytime that you're not in love, you are in fear. And so, that's something that can, as we, I think, feel like as you progress, you start to become more sensitive to that, where certain things that you perceived as neutral, um, you start to experience as fearful, as painful, right? And that's when they start to become more and more no longer these neutral thoughts about people, but you realize there's fear there. I'm seeing them as an empty shell. I'm not seeing them as a light, as one that's one with me. I'm seeing them as a random extra in my movie, right? And so when you can start to recognize even neutral thoughts, neutral things within your seemingly neutral things within your experience, also as calls for love, you'll start to experience an expansion where every moment, everything, every speck of dust is actually a call to love, which is eventually really a call to awakening from this whole world and letting the whole thing go. Okay. Um, 3. So darkness is lack of light, as sin is lack of love. It has no unique properties of its own. So darkness, which is physical sight, right, which is perception of an external world, is lack of light. So anything you see with your eyes, anything, even the good things, even the seemingly good things within this world, if you're seeing them and not kind of like seeing them as fake, you know what I mean? If you're seeing them and they seem real, you're seeing in darkness. But that darkness is not anything to be ashamed of. It's just that you're not seeing the light. And the light is this oneness experience that you see and experience through your heart. Um, Darkness is lack of light, as sin is lack of love. So when we see sin, when we see wrongdoing, it's not anything horrible, right? It's not something somebody's going to get punished for or that we need justice for. It's just something for which we forgot to send love. And so when we can reinterpret darkness as just lack of light, oh, wait a second, I'm not seeing light. I'm looking, I'm believing my eyes, I think I know something. Um, that opens us to being like, oh, wait, let me go to the light. Let me remember that I'm one with this other person, that there's only innocence, there's only love. Um, and we begin to let go of what we see with our eyes. So it has no unique properties of its own. It is an example of the scarcity belief from which only error can proceed. Truth is always abundant. Those who perceive and acknowledge that they have everything have no needs of any kind. The purpose of atonement is to restore everything to you, or rather to restore it to your awareness. You were given everything when you were created, just as everyone was. So that scarcity belief is also referred to within the Course as sacrifice. And it is an essential component of this whole world, right? Because we're separate, because there's separate things, there's limited resources. There's this uh, inherent scarcity within the world, right? You give money to pay for something, you no longer have that money, right? Or you give away something to help somebody out, you're kind of worse off on that level. And sometimes, yeah, there's some win-win situations, but really not really, right? Especially not for the animals that we eat, right? Or whatever. Uh, this scarcity is inherent within the world, but it's not from the world. So those experiences of loss, of sacrifice, of exchange, of you get this, but I get this, and I can use you for this, and you can use me for that. Um, they arise out of that. They don't come because like we can't sort that out within the world. Oh, if only we create like there's all these strategies of um, that people use to alleviate that guilt that comes from sacrifice and that guilt comes from scarcity, right? There's always going to be rich people there's always going to be poor people, right? And so there's a guilt that comes with that. When I have all the money, why don't the other people have the money? And so we created communism, right? Which is just traded one form of scarcity for another, right? Yeah, okay, most people have a lot of money, but all of a sudden, all the power lies with the government, right? And they have to control everybody to make sure everybody has the same amount of money. So then the scarcity is in power and autonomy and freedom. None of it works. You can't solve this problem from the world because the scarcity isn't from the world. That scarcity is that coming from that first layer of separation, right? Where we went from oneness with everything, this outflowing of love, of peace, of energy, in creation of one another. Um, to resting our consciousness into this scarce little wretch that destroyed all that was good within the world, right? So that's where the lack is. It's an unbearable lack. And that lack you'll find will grow as you identify with your ego, but you grow in awareness. It's so unbearable, right? And so what's happening is this exchange, the money, um, power, politics, where we're all exchanging scarce resources, starts to feel ickier and ickier because you're not because of anything inherent within the world, but because you're getting closer to that original lack that is unbearable, where we lost everything that was good within us. And there's this deep void that we need something within us. Um, so So the truth of what we are, because none of that really happened. The truth of us is spirit, right? And when love grows, the more you give it away, right? The more you give peace to others, the more peaceful you experience yourself. We live in infinity, right? We live in eternity. That is our nature. And so the more that we can experience that, the more we realize that's what undoes the guilt, is by realizing that we are an eternal spirit that is always outflowing love, that is always outflowing creation and abundance and to others. But the abundance isn't money. It's not things within the world. Um, you can be dirt poor and you can be a miser. You can be a bank that's coming after people and taking their money away and ruthlessly foreclosing on homes and still be a loving and abundant and ever peaceful and beneficent spirit, right? Because that's the truth, not just of the good people who are practicing the Course in Miracles, it's the truth of Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, it's the truth of the bankers and the Rothschilds and all of those people who seemingly are stealing from the world. Even they, the truth is that they are blessing you and giving out of an abundance of love. That's the truth of what they are. And until you can see that, you're going to be trapped in the world of darkness. Once you can start to see the light, you realize that it's the truth of everybody, even while they're committing their crimes and trying to seize their pound of flesh from the innocent, right? Even during it, not just after, you can forgive them when it stopped. You can forgive them in the act, just as Jesus did, because you realize that that's just darkness. It's all illusion. The truth is that even those Roman soldiers, as they were crucifying Jesus, were only giving love. And it takes that spiritual vision to see that and to really experience that. But you can, even in the midst of the worst mistreatment. Okay. 4. So the emptiness engendered by fear must be replaced by forgiveness. That is what the Bible means when there is no death, and why I could demonstrate that death does not exist. I came to fulfill the law by reinterpreting it. The law itself, if properly understood, offers only protection. It is those who have not yet changed their minds who brought the hellfire concept into it. I assure you that I will witness for anyone who lets me, and to whatever extent he permits it. Your witnessing demonstrates your belief and thus strengthens it. Those who witness for me are expressing through their miracles that they have abandoned the belief in deprivation in favor of the abundance they have learned belongs to them. So the emptiness is that void, right? The emptiness engendered by fear is that belief in scarcity that isn't about within the world, right? This isn't about manifesting, a Rolls Royce or whatever. It is the abundance that is experienced in abject poverty, sickness, and whatnot, seeming sickness, uh, not experiencing yourself as sick, but um, so yeah, from that experience, there is no death. Because what Jesus did was showed that death of the body is meaningless, right? Because we're spirit. That's the truth of what we are. You can be crucified, you can be thrown into a tomb, and you're just as much as alive as anybody else, right? The death, the life of the body is not the life that we're looking for. It's the life of the spirit that we can experience right now. Um, some of this other stuff, to be honest, I don't always catch on to. So, talking about the law, a lot of these early chapters, I think Helen Schuckman she was raised by, her parents were non-observant Jews, but then she had like a governess who was strongly religious, and I think there were two of them. One was Catholic, one was Baptist. Um, so she picked up the Bible quite a bit. So these were things that were strongly ingrained within her mind. But uh, so that's why we get very strong like corrections, right, of a lot of the concepts that come through the Bible. Um, I assure you that I will witness for anyone who lets me, and whatever extent he permits it. Your witnessing demonstrates your belief and thus strengthens it. So the witnessing, I think, here is it's not something it's not a term that's commonly used through the course. That's why I'm a little little off here, but I think he's saying demonstrating forgiveness, right? Um, and as you demonstrate that forgiveness and act according to the Christ mind, right? Following Jesus' example, um, uh, and practice the miracle, we will be witnesses to the abundance, right? Like how insane is it that somebody can feel abundant, loving, and forgiving even while they're being crucified, right? Who experience themselves as perfectly cared for and well while they're living in poverty, as Jesus said, like give up all your possessions and follow me, and there's nothing you need to worry about. Um, so I think that's what he's saying here, and that you will experience it as soon as you practice it. Okay, so that's kind of all I have for that section there. And then we'll go on to a lesson that um, will demonstrate some of this practice of seeing the light. Does anybody have any questions or comments here? Honestly, yeah, so that's a really great question. Yeah, because the pain and the darkness is it's awful, right? It's very painful. It's very difficult to kind of get through. So yeah, you don't need to always go into that. We have our escapes. We all have addictions. We all like, and what you realize is this whole world is an addiction, right? But we all have our things that we like to do to self-soothe, to get to avoid, to do those things, and those are all okay. None of those are wrong. This awakening process kind of takes care of itself. And so it's not something that you're doing as Deb, right? It's going to kind of happen of its own. Um, so you just do as much as you can, and then if you decide I'm kind of done, I do that all the time, right? Then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go watch YouTube or I'm gonna go whatever, hang out with friends, or I'll have a drink or whatever. Sometimes it's just painful because I'll often spend hours sitting in the pain. And then I'm like, okay, I can't do it anymore. Or I have some days where I can't see the light. It's just no. And and so I sit with it for a while, but then I spend a lot of time just trying to self-soothe, trying to honestly push it down. Like I can't really deal with that right now. And that's what um, a lot of us do. But eventually, what will happen is you'll have more and more of these light experiences where the pain eventually lets go. You have that forgiveness experience and you start to experience more light. And what happens at first is that um, the pain will motivate you because it's just kind of very painful to be in ego. So when you forgive, it relieves that pain. You start to feel a little bit more peace. So that then it's not about discipline. You're trying to do the right thing. It's like you're doing the forgiveness because it makes you feel better. Right. So that really needs to be the motivation. It's not something that you're becoming a perfect person or whatever, but it's like when you start to have enough experiences that, oh, I feel better when I do this, right? Then that's what's going to start to pull you. And then it will start to take on a life of its own. And when you're ready for it, you just kind of dedicate yourself and go through it. But the other thing too, is as you progress through it, you start to have some of these like light experiences. If you have like a revelation experience that I talked about where you just have this unconditional peace, out of body experience or whatever, then what happens instead of the pain motivating you, what happens eventually is the peace starts to grow and you're like, oh, well, that feels even better. Like that feels better than my life of before. You know what I mean? That feels better than even having a good life. And then that starts to pull you upward and you're like, okay, I can get through this darkness because I know that light is the truth and I'm going there. Right. But it's not it can feel like it's a decision, but eventually what happens, you'll just have these enough, you'll get on a run of it and it'll just feel better, right? So like like that as Patrick, as an ego, how do I do this? It's just that I do what feels good. And sometimes what feels good is pushing the pain down and getting away from it and like, nope, not right now. And then other times you realize that this forgiveness work just brings peace. It brings a lightness that you can't get within the world. And so you just do what feels good, and it just it takes on a life of its own. Just got some comments here I'm just going to read through. Um, resonates but has me at odds with the ego self. It's frightening. I agree. I remember feeling this within me, true light as a child. Yeah, the Celestine prophecy at age 13 brought it back, and then I started to age and the loss of innocence. I'll have to check that out, the Celestine prophecy. Um, but yeah, I think a lot of us have kind of had some of these experiences, and that's what drew me to the course. I just picked up the course, and it's like, oh, it's like it soothed my pain, and that's like I pick up that course now. Like I read a section of the text every day, and it's like I just apply it, and it's like I apply it to the pain, and it's like, oh, it just relieves it. It brings light. It brings like um another level that just allows me to see through, and you can just feel the healing happen. And so I do this course for a very selfish reason, right? To make I feel better. And that should be our only reason. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, some days I can pick up the course, I can try to practice my lessons, my mind just will not do it. And so I just have a few drinks. And whatever, I know that eventually I'm coming back to the course probably the next day, and and then I pick it up again, and sometimes I make a big breakthrough, you know. So yeah, don't be afraid to allow yourself to slip up, I guess. Sometimes it's not even a slip up. It's just sometimes it just doesn't work, and you need you need some self-soothing. So don't feel guilty about that. Okay. Okay, so let's move to the meditation. So this is lesson 44, which is God is the light in which I see. One thing that can be really helpful that I found, especially in these early lessons that bring in the idea of God, coming from a Catholic background, but even all of us, right? Because as a psychological concept, the ego God is always there, right? We always conceive of a God that is like in nature to ourselves. So when we perceive ourselves as ego, we're going to perceive an ego God, one that's fickle, that's sometimes loving, sometimes not. Um, Not really always powerful, right? So if he's always loving, why isn't he always giving me good things? um, right? So, so that is not the God we're talking about here. And so, what I like to do, I will often do this. It's up to you, but I will replace the word God with love. Um, and especially the love, if we're talking about unconditional love, because God is love, that opens you up because this God thing is a deeper, it's an experience. It's not really energy, but they're all just kind of pointers, right? It's not the guy in the sky, right, who made the world. So if you think of it, love is the light in which I see. Sometimes that will click a little more. Ah, okay. Seeing with loving eyes, seeing with the eyes of peace. Peace, you can use that as well because that's kind of an attribute of God. Um, God is the light in which I see. Love is the light in which I see. That will point you a little bit more because we want to see with the eyes of God. We don't want to see with the eyes of the ego God, right? Who's judging and sometimes loving, sometimes not. All right. So today we are, wait, I'm just going to see because we're going to go through some of this in the meditation, but I'll just read a bit of it. Today we are continuing with the idea for yesterday, adding another dimension to it. You cannot see in darkness. You cannot see in the physical world, and you cannot make light. Light is already there. You can make darkness, right? So we can make up this world. We can make up all these scenarios and all the problems and the good things and the bad things. Um, and then so you can make darkness, the physical world, and then think you see in it. But light reflects life. and is therefore an aspect of creation. So creation is our nature in heaven. So it's the outflowing of love into one another, creating other consciousness. They aren't really separate, but that's a pointer to kind of what it is. We do create kind of one another, but it's an outflowing of love. And creation and darkness cannot coexist. So our true creation that we can only see when we can see the light um, cannot coexist. But light and life must go together. So that being different aspects of creation. So what we think is that our life is what happens within this world of darkness, right? That we're born to a family, grow up, raised by parents and the government and the schools, and then we live our lives and work, and then we die. And we think that's life, and we think that's beautiful, and we think that, children are innocent and all of this, and it's a beautiful thing. That is the creation of life, but it isn't. It's a bastardization of true life, because our life is eternal. It's not something that can be corrupted and die. It's not that something can wither away in sickness. Um, so once we start to identify ourselves as spirit, when we start to see with the spiritual eye, um, this light will show us the truth of what's really going on behind the veil. And that's the one that will fulfill us, give us peace, love, and allow us to see the innocence in everyone. We can't see that in human beings. You can't see any human being as innocent. Um, you can try to, but it's not the real thing. You can only see it in special love, right? Children are innocent, but adults are guilty, right? They're horrible, selfish beings, right? But children, they're so innocent, right? So there you can see that's the ego's version of trying to put goodness within the world. Doesn't work. You will still feel the guilt when you see innocent children. You'll see the horrible adults and all the awful things they do to innocent children, right? And you'll be horrified by it, and that guilt will bring suffering with you into your dream. Um, so this life and the light are on the spirit level. And this is what we're trying to open ourselves up to. So I won't go through this whole thing because we'll go through it in meditation, but just to open yourself to those words because they mean something different within the course. All right.
Welcome to Free Your Mind, a guided and experiential daily practice designed to dissolve past programming and expand your awareness of who and what you truly are beyond the matrix of fear, lack, and separation. Let's begin. This is a holy instant. Begin to rest and relax. An instant to stop and remember. Take a deep breath and close your eyes as you exhale. Remember who you truly are. Begin to breathe more slowly and more deeply with your attention on your heart. You are not limited, but unlimited. Not mortal, but timeless. Not weak, but powerful beyond all measure. You are not the body, not even the mind. The reason that you don't experience the truth of who you are is only because you are dreaming. The core of the dream is the sense of identity that it offers you, an identity which appears to experience lack, conflict, and fear. This matrix dream character self is the self you assume you are based on your past and your conditioning. Beyond this matrix self is your true and original self, which can't be conceptualized, but it can be experienced. So take a deep breath And as you exhale, open your awareness to this holy instant now. An instant of investing your energy and attention to make contact with your unconditional freedom. Feel into it now. Feel into the frequency of your true self and use this guided experience to expand your awareness beyond the limits of your current reality. God is the light in which I see. With your eyes remaining closed, repeat this idea slowly to yourself and sense into its meaning. This idea is pointing to a real-time experience that is unfolding here and now. See if you can find it here and now. Even with your eyes closed, can you notice the light? Not the light from outside, but the light that illuminates your inner experience. Imagine a rose, for example. See it in your mind's eye. What is the source of the light that illuminates this inner vision? You cannot see in darkness, and you cannot make light. In order to see, you must recognize that the light is within, not without. You do not see outside yourself, nor is the capacity for seeing outside. An essential part of this capacity is the light that makes seeing possible. It is with you always, making vision possible in every circumstance. Today, we are going to attempt to reach that light. The form of practice we will use is the most natural and easy one for the disciplined mind, just as it seems to be the most unnatural and difficult for the undisciplined mind. In this practice, you may find that you will encounter strong resistance. The reason is very simple. While you practice in this way, you leave behind everything you now believe and all the thoughts which you have made up. Properly speaking, this is the release from the dream matrix of separation and the suffering that goes along with it. Perceived through the ego's eyes, it is a loss of identity and a descent into suffering. But if you can stand aside from the ego dream identity by ever so little, you will have no difficulty in recognizing that its opposition and fear are meaningless. God is the light in which you see. You are attempting to reach the source of the light and realize your true relationship of oneness with the Creator. Let's practice. Begin by repeating today's idea with your eyes open. God is the light in which I see. And now close your eyes slowly and repeat the idea several more times, unhurriedly, to yourself. And now try to sink into your mind, letting go every kind of interference and intrusion by quietly sinking past it. Sense yourself moving down and in. Your mind cannot be stopped in this unless you choose to stop it. It is merely taking its natural course of resting into awareness. Try to observe your passing thoughts without involvement and slip quietly by them. You need not apply any particular technique. What is necessary is a sense of importance of what you are doing. Feel into its inestimable value to you. Feel into the awareness that you are attempting something very sacred. Enlightenment is your happiest accomplishment. It is also the only one that has any meaning, because it is the only one that has any real use to you at all. Sink down and in, below the level of mentation and the thought in the language in which you speak, down beneath the concepts. Beneath the surface ripples of the mind. If resistance arises in any form, pause long enough to repeat today's idea and try to return to the core practice as soon as possible. You will know that you are doing this correctly if you experience some sense of relaxation, even a sense of approaching, if not actually entering, into the source of light. Try to think of light, formless and without limit, as you pass by the thoughts of this world. Remember that thoughts cannot hold you back unless you give them the power to do so. Continue now on your own for the next 4 minutes. Sinking down and in, below the level of form, into the formless light that illuminates all seeing. And as you come to the completion of this practice period, repeat the idea one more time. God is the light in which I see. And on your next inhale, take a deep, slow, and full breath in. Hold it at the top as you integrate this practice. God is the light in which I see. And as you exhale, relax and release. Throughout the rest of the day, repeat the idea often, with eyes open or closed, as seems better to you at that time. Do not forget. Above all, be determined not to forget today.
All right. Hopefully that was helpful for some of you guys. I think even if you didn't experience too much there, I think what's important in that is the willingness and the practice, right? When you set that intention and just sit with it, with knowing and confidence that the light will come. It might not come in the first session, but if you practice it, that's why if you feel called to it, the workbook, like doing the workbook from start to finish is like I'm just doing little tidbits, but when you do it from start to finish, when you do the daily lessons and you do it throughout the day, it sinks in. And eventually, when you set that intention, you sit with it and allow it, knowing that the light will come. It comes. It might not come in the first meditation, but it'll come in the second or the third. Um, uh, and yeah, so hopefully that was helpful for some of you guys. But even like it worked even in that time because you're allowing your mind to sink into it, and it will come eventually. So the more consistent you are in the practice, the more it will come through. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything to share before we end the recording?
Yeah, Patrick, Monique, I just wanted to support what you're saying. What I've started doing more recently is just not analyzing too much, just absorbing and letting things integrate on their own instead of my usual questioning and analyzing and just sort of allowing it to happen, trying to allow it to happen more. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. That's really helpful. And there's a lot of wisdom in that because yeah, the more you just allow it with confidence, you know what I mean? Like, you know what? I don't need to understand everything right now. The more you'll actually absorb, right? It will come into your mind and change your mind when you're ready. That's amazing. And even for this whole process, right? Because we all have falling aways, we'll fall off course and whatnot. And one thing that I found really helpful, it was the thought and the understanding that um, our awakening itself is out of our hands. It is not happening through Patrick, right? It is happening through the Holy Spirit on a higher level. And so to let go, and that actually, ironically, letting go and letting go of the guilt and feeling like you need to do the work to awaken yourself. There is work involved, but it starts to happen of its own, and you can kind of let go, and that will, ironically, being okay with falling away, letting go of that. Ironically, you let go of the guilt, and then you actually end up being more motivated, and you're actually able to awaken quicker. So yeah, that's really helpful. The more you let go, the more you just kind of allow it to happen, it accelerates. Yeah, it's one of those one of those laws of spirit.
And I also think that we forget that the fact of being aware that we're in the process of awakening, or that awakening is a thing to be done,
Yeah.
we're already way ahead of the game.
Oh yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, thanks, Monique. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'll just end the recording here.